Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about Advanced Dungeons & Dragons design pillars. I've talked about design pillars on this channel. I have a whole video on it. I'll link it below. In short, these pillars are like the bedrock, the foundation of your game, from which all features and all content spring from and to which they serve. It's basically you saying, this is essentially what my game is about, and everything I'm going to talk about, from a mechanic to the storyline to elements of the setting, will make sense with respect to those pillars. I want to talk about what AD&D's design pillars were. Why? It was my first tabletop role-playing game. It was the very first thing that told me what a role-playing game could be, which of course very much influenced my career. But its design pillars were never clearly stated anywhere. The game itself sprang from strategy tabletop games where they were essentially battle simulations, and occasionally a hero character would emerge from that. You'd have a bunch of battles and there was one surviving lieutenant or captain that survived battle after battle after battle, and you were kind of starting to get attached to them. And Dungeons and Dragons, and then later AD&D, which formalized a lot of D&D's rules, were people wanting to play characters from those sessions and have them become heroes, where they would go into dungeons and fight villains and gain all kinds of loot and maybe get their own castle and become a hero. From all this, what I always took from D&D as its fundamental pillar was, with reference to fantasy, because that's what it was aimed at, is that any character you could think of, whether you liked Lord of the Rings or whether you liked the Hyborian Age, if you wanted to play Aragorn or you wanted to play Conan, it was possible. I believe that was one of AD&D's design pillars. It wasn't that they were balanced or fair. It was possible. Now let me tell you what I think the difference is there. In terms of you making a character of a particular class and then fighting a boss monster later in the game, AD&D said it was possible for you to make what you were thinking of. You could make Aragorn or you could make Conan. Can you kill this boss? Maybe. Does not guarantee it. Some other designers are really into balance. And what balance would be is, no matter what class you make, you will find that boss equally challenging. Maybe for different reasons, but it's equally challenging because the classes have been balanced. I'm on record as not really being that big into balance. I like fairness. Fairness means if I provide you with classes, I have guaranteed that no matter what character class you make, what build you make in any of those classes, that you can kill that boss. I'm not saying it's equally challenging, everyone. Some of those classes are going to be much harder, and some of that difficulty is going to come from you better have the perfectly right equipment. You better know what all your abilities are. You better know when to use them, timing-wise. You may even need to know what order to use them. So that ability will only help you with that boss if first you cast this debuff and then you use this ability. If you don't know how to do that, you the player, you may not be able to kill that boss. But I guarantee it's possible because I had someone in QA do it without cheating. So that's what I think is the difference between possibility, balance, and fairness. And I think AD&D was about possibility. But if you read the DM's Guide, the one from 1979, it's on my bookshelf back there, page 9, you will see these two quotes. Quote 1, read how and why the system is as it is, follow the parameters, and then cut portions as needed to maintain excitement. 2, certain rules can be distorted or disregarded altogether in favor of play. Okay, what's that telling me right there is that AD&D was telling you, you can change this stuff or throw these rules out entirely as long as you want the game to play better, to be exciting. I mean, they specifically say that. And I think a big chunk of that came as they recognized that their game was not about balance. In fact, it was massively unbalanced. I wrote an article for Dragon Magazine back in the 80s, and I have a video about it below because it got rejected. Don't talk to me about rejection. I analyzed all the classes to compare them, and my conclusion was they are massively unbalanced. Some classes went up levels way faster. Some got hit points way faster. There was so much not the same. And I actually identified certain class race combinations that were, as much as you can say the word objectively better than other race class combinations in terms of what equal amount of experience points let that character do. And again, this is because AD&D was about balance. I mean, it wasn't about balance. It was about possibility. They just wanted you to be able to make that barbarian or make that ranger. They didn't care if barbarians and rangers were balanced. What happened is, as I started getting older, so I started playing D&D at 14. By the time I was in grad school, problems were arising with friends of mine who were playing AD&D. One of my players rolled a fighter and rolled an 18 for strength, so got to roll percentile, and she rolled 91. Looking at the rules, she was like, wait, if I make this, she's going to make a human fighter. If I make her a female, I'm capped at 1850. But if I make him a male, I can go up to 1800. Why? And here's the thing. That was the rule, but there was no reason stated. And she wanted me to get rid of the rule, and I was worried that there may be a balance issue because I couldn't find any bonuses that a human female fighter got. There was only this penalty. So because I'm about fairness, not so much about balance, that struck me as just unfair. So I cut it. But that was the only changes I made to D&D. There were lots of other rules I played with. For armor, we made a rule that magical armor resized itself. So it didn't matter who was wearing it. If you killed them and you took that chain +1 or that plate +2, it would fit you. But non-magical armor didn't work that way. It would have to be resized by an armorer or blacksmith or leather worker, depending on what kind of armor it was, if it was too far away from the person wearing it size. Now, the DM's Guide had height and weight charts for all the different races and genders. So you could roll their weight. And we had some rule, like if it was within 3 inches and 20 pounds, you could wear it. Otherwise, you had to pay to resize it. Here's the problem, though. Almost all the bad guys, and I say guys specifically, in modules, bandits, mercenaries, the people who will most likely be wearing armor, humans or demi-humans wearing armor, were males. And most of them were human males. Meaning that the armor that appeared overwhelmingly more often was sized for human males. Which meant if you played anything else, if you played that dwarf fighter or that human female fighter, you didn't find armor very much that fit you. So you were paying often for resizing, where that human male fighter wasn't. So I changed that rule so all non-magical armor, you had to pay to resize it. Magical one resized itself. Non-magical, everybody paid. I stopped looking at the height weight chart. But then we started running into AD&D had racial level limits. So demi-humans were level limited in almost every class. I think what's weird is I think half-elvens were unlimited in druid, and several of the demi-humans were unlimited in thief. But play anything else. Play a fighter, play a magic user, play a cleric. You were capped at a maximum level you could go up to. Despite the fact that you lived longer, it didn't make much sense. At first we thought it was in there for balance reasons because demi-humans could multi-class. You could be a fighter magic user or a fighter magic user cleric. You could be 2 or 3 classes at the same time. Humans couldn't do that. Humans could do something else called we called it 2 classing. That was when you played one class for a while and then switched to another class and started playing it. And when your second class level exceeded your first class level, then you could start using abilities from both, but you could never go back to the first class and raise it. At first, we thought that those level limits were there to balance that, so we originally kept them. But over time, we realized that all the supposed advantages you got from demi-human, which were attribute adjustments, infravision, speaking lots of languages, and multiclassing, that didn't seem very well balanced. So we eventually tossed the racial level caps. We kept two classing as human only and multiclassing as demi-human only, but that was the choice you were basically making there. Then I started changing a ton of roles. I added critical hits and misses to combat roles in D&D. I added that really early. I added that when I was still in high school. I also changed the rules for whether items had to make saving throws. Usually, if an item was subjected to any kind of damage, a regular blow up to a disintegration spell, you had to roll a saving throw to see if it survived. And we stopped doing that. I only kept that for what I called intense damage. So if a dragon breathed on you, or fireball, or it was immersed in acid, then it had to roll. And it only had to roll if it was on its own. If somebody was wearing it or had it on them, it only had to roll if they died. Or similarly, if it was in a chest, if the chest was destroyed, if instead of picking a lock, the players tried to destroy the chest to get into it, then the things inside had to roll. Other than that, threw all that out. I added special abilities and restrictions for clerics based on the deity they chose. It's something I've got in my book still. It was really cool. It meant that when you picked a particular deity, you may get a spell or even an ability that I would describe that was unique to that ability and that deity and their domain. But then there was a restriction, like maybe you couldn't eat meat, or you couldn't wear metal armor, or maybe you could use swords as your ability, but you couldn't wear plate. Something like that. It was wildly different for all the deities, and it was way before, I think, 3rd edition came out and had domains for deities. It was just something that I thought was cool because my campaign, I still had that fairness thing going on in the back of my head, but I was really thinking about I wanted more variety. These were house rules, and different DMs had different house rules, but my house rules were based on what I thought of then as variety and what I'd probably describe now as reactivity to player choice. I wanted anything the player decided in character creation or didn't play to have some kind of reaction, some kind of restriction or change or modification to something going on. And that was just kind of where all my later computer role-playing, philosophy came from. One reason I wanted to talk about this is modern D&D seems to have very different pillars. And I talk a lot about don't view older stuff through modern lenses. The new D&Ds seem to be much more focused on balance. They want balance. They want all those class race combinations to not only be possible, which AD&D wanted, but to be equally powerful. So that when they went up against a boss, they found all of those different class race combos would find the boss equally challenging, and everybody had a fair shake at it. And I'm not sure if they achieved this pillar, but it's certainly something they state that this is something they're going on. But I also think in addition to balance, there's a lot more focus on progression. And what that means is they want a clear way that every class and multi-class and two-class progresses, also in a way that's balanced against the other classes. So it's still balanced there, but they're also focusing not on just, hey, you're creating this character, but later on when it progresses, we kind of want to keep everything in check with each other. I'm positive they didn't succeed at that because every game of D&D I've ever played, 1st through 5th edition, gets quite unbalanced at high levels. But that's another topic. Anyway, I wanted to talk about this because I'm curious what you guys think. What do you think are the pillars for AD&D? What do you think the pillars are for its later editions? What do you think the pillars are for other tabletop role-playing games? I've talked about computer role-playing games here, but what about tabletop? Anyway, very curious to hear what you guys think.